Welcome to the World Football Summit podcast, the show for football industry leaders who want to stay ahead of the game. We bring you the latest insights, trends, and stories from the experts driving innovation and progress in sports business worldwide. Join us as we dive deep into the ideas and initiatives transforming the world of football. From sustainability and innovation to player development, fan engagement, and everything in between. Our goal is to unite the global football industry and drive positive change and progress. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the World Football Summit podcast. I'm your host, Jaime, Director of Content and Communications at World Football Summit. Today, Keith Wyness, former CEO at clubs like Aberdeen, Everton, or Aston Villa, returns to the show for a deep dive into the English Premier League, including the profit and sustainability rules, Manchester City upcoming hearing, the sale of Everton, ownership dynamics in the UK, and we even have time to talk about the Saudi Arabian football industry. Before we kick off, a quick reminder though. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the podcast on your platform of choice. Share it with your colleagues in the industry as well. It helps us a lot bring guests like Keith to the show. And if you want to stay ahead of the curve, subscribe to our newsletter. You can find all the links in the show notes. Remember, World Football Summit Europe in Sevilla is just around the corner on September 18th and 19th. And we also recently announced the return of World Football Summit Asia, taking place in December in Riyadh. Check it all out on our website. Now, nothing else from my side. Let's welcome back Keith Wyness. Keith, welcome back to the World Football Summit podcast. We're just starting a new season, and I was wondering who could help, understand me and the audience about everything that's going on in the Premier League. And after the fun conversation we had a few months ago, I'm happy to welcome you back to do so. So, yeah.
Well, it's great to be back at World Football Summit. I really enjoyed our first chat. It was very thought-provoking. And I must admit, I did get a lot of responses from the listeners. So I'm pleased to be back for number 2. Also, of course, at the start of the season, football, as usual, never disappoints. There's so many new topics and so many great things to discuss. So it was a great pleasure to be coming back on for number 2.
No, the pleasure is ours. And, we have to make this episode more popular than the first one, no? But before we go into all the different topics, what have you been up to?
Well, one very interesting project that I've been working on since we last spoke was a very interesting client who asked me to imagine what it would be like if you had a blank sheet of paper, to develop the best academy system that has ever been seen, and to try and then put together a squad that would be in 10 years able to challenge at the very highest levels. And it was to really take the best practices that were already in existence, but really to overlay it with the new technologies of artificial intelligence and other data research, etc., and really see what it would take to fulfill the dreams of creating an academy that could really deliver great people. So that's been a fascinating project to work on, as you've had to really rip up the old ideas. And the academy system had really sort of grown, if you like, as each learning came about, then another layer kept going on top. But to have a chance to start off completely fresh and to think what it would be like, then that was a great chance to really think outside the box and see how football could be in the future. So that was a great project. Besides that, there's been the usual number of club potential acquisitions, buying and selling, and also helping some of the clubs with different areas that they're having problems with, where my experience and network can help. So overall, it's been always exciting. Every day seems to be a little bit different. So it's been a great few months.
Good stuff. And I'm already looking at my calendar to see when I bring you back to talk about that Academy project. So we'll speak offline about that. Anyway, Keith, as you said, new season, new challenges. But so many things to talk about. Let's start with a little bit of a review of the Premier League. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, the recently introduced financial rules, where it's limiting clubs to spend, if I got this correct, it's 85% of the revenues on squad cost, no? So do you think this is going to impact the competitiveness of the teams? And if so, how?
Well, it's really been the biggest topic of conversation within the Premier League of how the profit and sustainability rules that were already passed have been, actually, utilised and put into practice. And it's led to the Premier League being in really hostile fighting with some of its shareholders, which is never a great thing to have happened. Everton and Notts Forest, actually, as you probably know, took points deductions as a result of this. And I think the general unhappiness has led to looking for another system, which is the one we're talking about now, the squad valuation and the has to be a percentage of the turnover of the club. And that includes just transfer fees and wages. So it's a move to try and make it more transparent and easier to understand, more black and white, because clubs, as usual, with all the great brains and minds behind them, have been finding loopholes in the existing rules. And, everybody's now getting lawyered up beyond belief. And clubs are becoming more excited about who is their new barrister rather than who is their new left back,
Yeah.
which I think is a very worrying trend in football. So that's genuinely the case, that I think there have been more column inches about the legal teams than there have been about the actual teams, which is very sad to see. But yes, I think the idea is to try and make it a clearer playing field as best it can. But as I say, with the way football is and the way football brains work, people will always try and find that loophole.
Yeah. And to your point, I think some clubs are going to have to start launching merchandise with the names of their lawyers. Something going to become so popular. But in all seriousness now, Keith, do you think this measure is actually going to help level the playing fields among the clubs? Like, that are, you see it in the Premier League, you have your big six and then you have the rest. Is this going to help with the balance of competitiveness between them?
Well, look, with all the best intentions of the profit and sustainability rules, that was the intention. But what actually happened was that it became as though the top six had pulled up the drawbridge behind them and really had an advantage over the other clubs. So the reason I'm hesitating in giving you a clear answer is because until we see them in practice and we start to see how the clubs actually operate within these sort of parameters, it's very hard to say how it will help. The intention is there to make it help, of course, but the reality will be, I'm afraid, having to be seen in practice. So I'm going to be watching it very closely. I think we all will, but it's going to be, we're going to have to watch it and see actually what happens, because with the competitive instinct, as I say, the human nature is always to try and find a loophole and get that competitive advantage. So it's just the nature of the game. So we're going to have to wait and see if this is foolproof or loophole proof, and we'll just have to watch how it translates into reality, and that's going to be the key thing.
Because one question, Keith, do you think the current distribution model of the Premier League is it fair, or?
Well, it's probably the fairest there is of all the top leagues in Europe. I think the disparity between the top club and the bottom club is roughly about 4 times maximum, which I think is lower than any other league in Europe. So it is pretty fair. What has been disappointing, let me give you a quick rundown of the way the 100% of the broadcast money is spent. 25% is still split equally amongst all the clubs. 25% is given on positions that you end up in the year, and then the balance will be split in terms of where you actually, how many games are shown on TV, etc. Now, the international broadcasting part of this as well used to be shared equally. Now the Big Six made a big play for that, and so that is now the one area that I think is more contentious. I actually was personally responsible for changing the Premier League rules to make sure that at least the clubs got the TV equivalent of having 4 games, whereas when Liverpool, Man United were on TV every other weekend, the other clubs had to get some sort of look in. And so that's still on the books. But overall, I think we've got to see that apart from the international revenue, again, which has become skewed, overall, the general effect is it still is the lowest margin between top and bottom. So I've got to say it's still reasonably fair.
Mm-hmm. And that's because the international rights are, let's say, there's more money coming in from the international rights than the national rights. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine when they first accepted the rules back in the time I was at Everton, it was the international revenue was split equally because probably the international revenue, they never saw it becoming as big as it is now. And you're right. I mean, it's bigger than the domestic revenue now. And so as that's grown, they thought, hang on, we're not going to share this equally. We're going to take as much as we can for ourselves. Now, let's not forget, on top of this, the Big Six have all the European revenue, which comes on top, of course. And that's really what skews the whole, competitive advantage.
Mhm.
And that's the big problem, is how we can get other clubs challenging to get into the European spots and making the league more competitive that way. We've seen clubs like Aston Villa make it into the Champions League this year for the first time. Those are the sort of things that are going to make a difference in the competitive balance, because it is the European prize money, and with the new Champions League format, etc., that gets even bigger. That's really what skews it, rather than the way that the funds are actually distributed in the domestic sense. So I think that's where the big challenge is.
And because I get it, if you play European competition, you get that advantage. But if you're a, call it, mid-table team that's regularly playing in the Premier League, usually are there, you're not at risk of relegation, at least in the short term. How are these clubs effectively competing with the Big Six? Is there something they can do?
Well, this is where, as I say, the clubs have got to find a way forward now. The best example would be, to answer your question, it can be done. Clubs like Brighton, for instance, perhaps they got lucky and they found a new Chelsea owner at the right time. And they made a king's ransom, I think almost 200 million out of the transfer fees that Chelsea paid them for some of their players. Now, that's given them a chance to put together a squad now that could challenge and try and get into the European places. So perhaps the way to look at it is, how do you beat the Big Six? Well, you find ways to give them what they want, uh, and become sort of not so much a feeder club, but certainly some of your best talent has to go up there, and you hopefully get into a better balance as the money changes hands. And Brighton example is one that was quite spectacular in its scale, and Chelsea and Brighton, the money that changed hands there. Also, Liverpool to Southampton is another one that was like that for a while. So it's that's given that we all believe that money equates to points, then that's the way to try and balance things up if you can do, and that's, as I say, giving them what they want.
hmm Yeah, I guess obviously Brighton did things very well, in terms of the transfer strategy, but then they were at the right place at the right time, it seems, no? In terms of, being able to sell their players and their coach even
Yeah,
to another team.
it reminds me of I think there was a famous businessman in Australia called Alan Bond, and Kerry Packer was also a businessman, and he said he really had he'd bought he'd sold the TV station to Alan Bond, then he bought it back for next to nothing. And as he said, he only gets one Alan Bond in his life.
Yeah,
I think Brighton only get one Todd Bowley in their life, and
probably.
they've been quite lucky. But hey, listen, you've got to be good to be able to capitalize on those opportunities.
Yeah.
And that's just one example of how we could look to try and level things up in some way. With the it's not trickle down, but I think it's a bit more than trickle. We've got to find a way to balance it up in those sort of.
And when you look at other, for example, you compare the Premier League with other sports, let's say. I was looking and I found some research that said that the NFL teams collectively had like $4.6 billion in revenue, while all the Premier Leagues combined had an $800 million loss. What are the factors that make this so different? Because you would argue the Premier League has probably more fans in the world, um, but still, from a revenue standpoint or a business standpoint, the difference is huge.
Well, there are two things that are very fundamental to those big valuations for the NFL. You're right. I mean, in terms of viewership, obviously, it's still very popular in the States, and in the big commercial market that is America with its heritage, it's still got a good position. But the two things that really increased the value were, of course, one, no relegation, and so no threat of that. And the second one, that when it happened, that really put the value through the roof, was having a salary cap, because then investors had a certainty over costs. In football, that's what we don't have. We have the threats of relegation, obviously, and then we have the problem with costs could go as high as they could spiral with wages, and we've seen owners go crazy with transfer fees and wages. So those are the two things. Now, for an investor, of course, both those things are absolutely crucial. If you know you've got no relegation, you will be more inclined to invest into new stadiums, etc., and also big longer term projects, which is could be quite important. And if you know what your fixed costs are going to be every year in terms of salaries, then you've got certainty. So those are the key things that make the NFL, I think, very good investments, and why they're changing hands for in the billions. I think you're right. I mean, I've seen valuations certainly of the one that has some football connections is the Washington Commanders, who have Harris and Blitzer, who have Crystal Palace shares. That being valued about 6 billion. I've seen Dallas Cowboys now at 10, 11 billion. Huge valuations compared to football clubs. But I think those are the fundamental reasons why private equity and the big investors can look at those sort of situations.
Yeah. I think the key word that you said there is certainty overall, And then on the other hand, I'm thinking, let's see how this recently approved rule, let's say that NFL is going to welcome in private equity. Let's see how that turns out, that the possibilities that are going to open for them there, no? So let's see if the difference gets bigger or not, no?
Well, just to mention on that private equity rule, which I think is quite important.
Yeah.
I think what it's going to open up is a very big interest in football in terms of minority stakes. Is that is something that hasn't really been done before in football to a great degree. Radcliffe at Manchester United is one example of it recently, but I think we're going to see more and more minority stakes in clubs coming in, which I think is a good thing. But this will come from the experiences, again, of private equity in the NFL, who will be looking at, a 10, 15% sort of area. Uh, a lot of clubs that contact me looking for funding are looking for minority partners. And in the past, it's been frowned upon. People feel that unless they've got control, they're not getting the full football experience. Whereas I believe that being part of a successful club with good football management, a minority stake can be a good, successful way to invest.
Yeah. Well, let's see how that plays out because that's going to be interesting in terms of how that evolves. Um, Another thing that I'm looking out for is, well, now that we're talking about the NFL, they're making a strong push towards playing games outside of the US, trying to get more international fans. So they're actually playing here in Spain in November. They're playing in Brazil. But when you look at the other way around, for the time being at least, there's not a possibility of seeing Premier League teams play official games there. They have done strong summer tours and they've been all over the place. But do you see the possibility of them actually playing official games in the US, for example?
Well, I have the bruises and the cuts and wounds to show from the battle in 2007 when we looked at what they called the 39th game, and we were going to play the 39th game and it was going to go overseas. I fully supported that concept, and I still do support the concept of a Premier League round of matches being played overseas. I don't think people understand that. I mean, so much we already touched on international revenue coming from international broadcasters. That's a crucial amount of money coming into the game, and those fans are contributing just as much as the domestic fans. And so I think it's quite fair to be able to bring the product to them. I think at least once a year, and I think the spectacle of having games played in different time zones over a whole weekend would be fascinating, and I think it would be incredible for the game. Also, you can't ignore the reality that you've got the NFL now coming into Europe. You've got the NBA coming into Europe. Baseball was over in London just recently as well. There's no doubt that all those sort of competing opportunities will be there. And Premier League is global, and I think those fans deserve to be able to touch and feel a game. And so, whatever form, it's the way that the formula comes up as to how we do it will be the key thing. Uh, as I say, I was very much in favour, and the bruises came because the media jumped on it straight away and almost killed the idea before it was even born. And, the idea of a 39th game. Now, what people didn't realise, and when I did my research when I was at Everton there, we only had about 1,800 fans that actually went to every single game, home and away. And I'd worked out that if with the money we'd have got from this special game overseas, I could have flown those fans across to the game, say it was in Los Angeles, and given everybody a free holiday, which would have been, but we never had a chance to explain that concept. And I think a lot of the fans might have been more in favour when they look at those sort of things that could be out there. It's all those things become possible when you start to be a bit more creative and look at it from the fan point of view as well, which perhaps we didn't announce that properly. So I think with the work done with that sort of thing in mind, I think it's possible to create an attractive scenario to satisfy everybody. But importantly, those fans overseas get a touch and feel, the teams will be there for a week or whatever it's going to be, and they're going to be there signing autographs and doing fan meets, etc. It'd be great. I'm all for it. All for it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at the end of the day, we spoke about this with Stephen Mandis on the show, and he was always asking, "Who's the fan?"
Yeah.
And I've actually spoken to it even a few weeks after having you in the podcast. We had Peter Moore from Liverpool, and he said that a club, you need to manage it with a local heart but a global pulse, meaning you cannot deny the fact that you have international fans as football clubs are becoming international brands. You really need to bring the fans along on the journey, and if you're going to do that, you have to be as close to the game as possible, and that's effectively going there. No, so I think it makes sense. I agree with you.
Yeah, no, I did a whole project once where we're going to be taking El Clasico on the road to the States as well. And when you start to get into it, I mean, say if it's fan centric and you do that first, I get that. That's what you must focus it on. But around that, when I took Everton to Thailand for one of our trips, we did a trade mission for local businesses to go with us to try and create economic benefit for those companies and create sales overseas, and it worked really well. So when you start to think of the bigger picture that this can do and how football can use its power properly, I think it becomes a bit of a no-brainer. Of course, as I say, you've got to win the fans over, and for a change, let's put them first, rather than thinking of the dollar signs. But I think there's a way to it, and if everybody met and the Everton local fan base in the overseas city welcomed the fans from Liverpool, it would be fantastic. It would be great. So I'm looking for the positive sides on this, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the clubs that has actually done best from the Premier League in building an international fan base has been Manchester City. I think, especially building an audience in the US, their participation in Ted Lasso, no? But the truth is, they're kind of like facing a little bit of a tough situation now. I think the hearing is going to be set for September regarding the case with their alleged breaches of the sustainability rules. So, what can happen? What's the impact on the Premier League, even if we see there's something that goes very wrong for Manchester City in this case?
Well, we touched on the base of having the top lawyers and barristers, and believe me, Man City have put together a team as good as on their pitch in terms of who their legal eagles are behind them. And certainly, it's going to be 12 weeks, is what they've said should be the time allowed for the actual hearing itself, which is a long time. So there's going to be a lot of evidence put forward, a lot of expert witnesses. There's over 115 charges, etc. So a huge amount of work to get through, and then of course it'll take at least a few months to be able to consider the evidence, and then they'll have to write their opinion. So I think we're looking at well into well after Easter, and then I think there'll be appeals, and then it'll go forward. It'll be a long one. Now, to get to your question, I believe that if it comes through, I think City could be relegated from the Premier League, which would be an amazing situation. I think that's the reality that we could be facing. The problem for everybody is that this has dragged on for so long. The damage is continually being done, and it's eroding away at the credibility of the Premier League. And in everybody's interests, I hope it doesn't go to appeal. I hope right now that those very well-paid legal eagles find a way to come to some sort of agreement between the Premier League behind the scenes, and that there is some way that we try and resolve this, because it just hurts football. And as I say, it's taken away the headlines from off the pitch, to off the pitch rather than on the pitch. And I'm really hoping that there is a way that some sort of peace can break out. But I do believe that the evidence that I've seen, that I've reviewed, everything that I can look at would point to the fact of something like a 70-point deduction, which would mean relegation, and something of that nature. Now, if that doesn't happen, then there'll have to be a very good reason, and I think that's what we're all waiting to see. So I'm getting the popcorn ready. It's going to be a fascinating long time, but I think it could be that bigger situation. Don't forget, there's the example in Scotland of Rangers who were dropped right down because of employee benefit situations, and so there is a precedent for that sort of thing happening.
So
Um,
you're not ruling it out.
Absolutely not. No, no. I think it could. I think that would be the favourite outcome in my own view right now. Is what I think is most likely, and But then again, as I say, I'm not a top-paid barrister, and I haven't seen the evidence. But that's only my opinion so far from the stuff I've seen. But it's also the view of a lot of people I've been speaking to. that believe the Premier League are in a pretty strong position on this one.
Yeah, and that's a good caveat there. We're not legal experts here. This is just, two friends talking about what we could potentially see. So, and don't take this as legal advice, just their opinions. Anyway, another thing that's been going on for a long time, and I think it touches your heart a little bit, relates to Everton. With all the process around the sale, now we're selling 7-7 partners, now we're not. Now there's a new owner coming, and probably a potential purchaser coming in. I mean, what's going to happen there? What challenges do you see? Is that ever going to materialize? I mean, overall, what do you think of the situation?
Well, you're right. It's a very, very messy situation. It's been an incredible soap opera. I've actually been involved in it to a degree, not at the moment, but I've touched it, and I've been around the tornado that is the wrecking ball of the Everton situation. Of course, it all came from the strange issue with Ukraine and Russia, of course, and the sanctions that then created havoc quickly overnight, basically, in terms of Everton's funding. And since then, it's been compounded by very bad mistakes on the football side, with a number of managers that have come through. So there's been instability on that side, coupled with instability at the top level. Of course, is a recipe for disaster. And we've been very lucky that the last 2 seasons we've got through the relegation battles. And I really had hoped that the Friedkin Group, who'd been announced as taking exclusivity, were going to be the right owner. We now have John Textor, who's got the exclusive window right now to buy the club. And I hope there could be a combination even of Friedkin and Textor together that may be a perfect solution. We've yet to see, because I know Textor is at the moment having a flotation on the stock market in New York. And if he gets his 2.3 billion, which I think is the number he's looking for, that would be enough, I think, to be able to go ahead and try and get the club, which is going to be in this beautiful new stadium that opens next season. It'll be one of the best in the world. And, there are very, very few opportunities to be able to get a club like Everton with its pedigree and its heritage and its history. So, those things don't come along very often. So I would hope it can be resolved, but there's no doubt the present owner, Mr. Mashiri, he's had his challenges, I say, because of the Ukraine situation, but also there's been some very poor decisions behind the scenes that have led us into this very perilous position.
Yeah, I think everything compounds, no? And, you get stuff going wrong on the business side, and then the football side doesn't come along and support or turn things around. So you're just starting to creating this negative flywheel. Tough situation, no? I guess you experienced that probably yourself throughout your whole career, no?
Yeah, look, it's very clear that when you're at the top of an organization, you are responsible for setting the tone and the whole thing, the whole vibe throughout the whole organization. And at the moment, there is no top. There is no control, no leadership. And for a thing, such an organism like a football club that is so human and based around the performance of human beings, it's crucial that there is leadership. And so, look, it's a tricky situation. They've had a bad start to the season. However, in my own optimism, I believe they're going to be okay this year. We're going to still be in the Premier League, and we'll open up in that new stadium with a new ownership group, and things are going to be very rosy for us going forward.
Yeah, let's see. And in your opinion, what can the Premier League do to ensure situations like this don't happen?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this because, in particular, if you remember, there was a group called 777, and it dragged on for a long time. And I was being very vocal about that, saying the Premier League should put perhaps a 3-month window of when a bid comes in for it to be resolved within a certain period of time. Also, I think it's got to be, although the owners and directors test doesn't really happen until a deal has been agreed, there's got to be a way the Premier League gets involved earlier to approve a bidder. That would help get things going as well, and perhaps throw up some issues about whether the funding is really there. It seemed to be everybody in the world knew that there were big issues about 777, but Everton and Mashiri were sort of just forgetting and putting their fingers in their ears and saying, no, it's not real, that they're great. But everybody seemed to know. And the Premier League also knew. And so, there comes a time when they've got to tell the club owners, look, what are you doing? Of course, the problem is here legally is that the Premier League doesn't own the clubs.
So they kind of like the hands tied, no? They're deploying witnessing some stuff, but they can't really do anything.
Yeah, they're just the regulator for the game in a sense, as well as organising the competition that we play in. So they can't really talk to somebody else who owns an asset and dictate to them that way. They can certainly approve people and say yes, they can be qualified to become owners, but they can't dictate the method about they go about trying to sell their own assets.
Right.
That would be very difficult. Putting timescales on a transaction, or there may even be a window of for club sales that we look at in some like players. Maybe that's the way we have to look at it.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's something that requires a lot of thought as to how we get into that.
Yeah, I know. I think the Premier League, in a way, did seem like they did what they had to do in
Yes.
terms of
Yep.
not letting that transaction go on,
Yes.
So,
Absolutely.
so credit to them there. And now that we're talking about ownership, we're seeing a lot of owners from outside football coming into football. So how does this impact, the management of teams, the overall dynamics of a league? How do you assess that situation?
Well, if you look at it in the context of how football really has grown from the 60s and 70s and 80s going through, where it started off with the local butcher or the local car dealer or the local businessman who helped support his local club. We're now into, countries, nation states. We're now into, private equity, etc., a whole different realm of owner. The problem has always been, in my view, and I've had to deal with owners who have just come into football for the first time, is their knowledge of football and really understanding it. The trouble is with football, everybody thinks they know it and they understand it, and it's easy as far as they're concerned. They've seen things like Football Manager, they watched it on TV, listened to the pundits, and they believe they could do it better. Everybody tends to think that. The bigger money that's come in recently has, tried to buy their way to solutions. They've tried to buy the best tech brains, the best data brains. They've tried to buy the best sporting directors. But what you see is the same pool of people pretty much continually being recycled around the same sort of clubs. I mean, I look at Dan Ashworth, who's gone to Manchester United as a sporting director. Name kept cropping up, and I even interviewed him for the Aston Villa job. So it's a case of there are people that do understand the game and have been in there for, as long as I've been there for 25 years now. You do have to have that period of time, I believe, to understand the mistakes that have been made before, to understand the historical trends, to understand who's good, who's bad. You've got to have made mistakes yourself to really understand what is the right thing to do. But at the same time, you've also got to be open-minded enough to see what the future can bring with the new technologies, with artificial intelligence, and with great intelligent youth coming through as well behind the scenes, not just on the pitch. So, and technology, there are so many things that have got to be taken into account. So you've got to be open-minded about that. But at the same time, you've got to make those decisions based on the fundamentals of football. People often forget, the most important thing is, and it's so boring to say, and it's so obvious, but you've got to win football matches. And sometimes people get carried away with financial models and, data and the whole thing. And they forget that 3:00 on a Saturday is going to be an important time to go and win a game. And they think the preparation becomes the issue. And I used to ask sporting directors when I interviewed them, what do you think about why isn't it easier to win football games? And the best answer I think I ever got was, he said, well, look, you can prepare your players properly. You can put the right strategy together, the best game plan. You can select nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. But you've then got 11 people on the other side trying to completely stop you doing what you're planning to do. And that's what the charm of football is about. And that's what a lot of people often forget is a man against man human competition. And it's the more that we try and make these athletes into super beings, I think we're losing something pretty special. And I'll give you one other little aside that was quite funny. Was when I was at Aston Villa, the Chinese owner felt that the players should be like artificial intelligence machines themselves. They should understand that when the opponent had the ball in a certain part of the pitch, they should be able to read the game. They should be able to know about 100 options, which way they should position themselves, etc. And so they become almost like computers, is what he was trying to say. And I said, well, Tony, that's all right. I said, but Jack Grealish can't even remember his own name. So how do you expect him to to do that, and I mean that in the nicest way to Jack, by the way. I'm a huge fan, but it's the average footballer would not be able to maintain that sort of information, and I think it would. It's all about reaction and spontaneity, and rather than trying to make the game robotic, and so that's where I think a lot of the new owners are missing the point that you've got to go back to basics. Yes, there is a level of marginal gain that you can go through, but don't take away from the reality of spontaneity, skill, talent, and letting human beings be human beings and with frailties, and that's also what the fans want, I think.
This is something that I've discussed with other football industry leaders in the show, which is at the end of the day, football is the essence. It's the core. So I discussed this with Julie Ehrman from Angel City a few weeks ago. And at the end of the day, and we were talking about how baseball, looking at other sports, they were able to innovate, but always keeping in mind or respecting the legacy of the game. And I think that's something we cannot forget,
Yeah, that's my point exactly. And that comes also from understanding it and having lived it for 20 odd years. And a new owner doesn't have that chance. I know it's exciting and they learn from mistakes pretty quickly, but it's better not to have those mistakes and take your time and listen to people in the game to a great degree. By all means, try and encourage some level of change, but it isn't going to be dramatic change because you'll lose sight of the reality of football and the beauty of football.
I was listening actually yesterday to a very interesting conversation on the Unofficial Partner podcast with Richard Gillis, who's been on the show as well. And they were talking about some research that with focus groups, asking people how if they believe that someone who had ownership in other sports could effectively come into football and manage well. And the perception was completely, even to the point that they said that it's better not to have any experience in sports than to bring in experience from other sports because they're totally different, And to that point, for example, one of those cases, as we just talked about, is Todd Boyd, from Chelsea. Everything that he's been doing is kind of like watched from, with a very, let's say, focused lens. So I don't know if there's any lessons that can be learned, good or bad, way he's been managing the team, running the team so far.
Well, I think it's a case of they've not allowed stability to even blossom. They've made changes too quickly and they've perhaps not given their initial decisions time to actually bed in. And in football, that's important. As well as Todd Bowley, I think the other one to look at right now is Jim Radcliffe at Manchester United. And it was just, this morning I was just reading about how his cycling team, and we talked about other sports just now, about baseball, etc., but he owns a big cycling team, Ineos. And in 5 years, the Ineos team it was the leader in the Tour de France and all those sort of big races for a long time. It's now in a real problem. And Jim Radcliffe is now trying to basically put in place a lot of the things he thought he had learned from Ineos. But they haven't proven to be that successful long term. A lot of the language he's using is exactly the same. So this is exactly your point about that we can't pick up from different sports and different learnings. And I think with Bowley and Chelsea, to me, it's all about giving things a chance. They may not have got it so wrong as they think, because just because they didn't get instantaneous results doesn't mean they're wrong. And that's what I think they've got to understand again about football. It takes a long time for a team to gel, for a squad to respond to a manager. And those are the human bits that, machines you don't just flick a switch and things happen within football. And that's what these guys expect. They want to see the curve in private equity going up. And when it isn't, they think they've got to make a change. And that isn't always the right way to handle it. So again, coming back, it's football experience and knowledge and people that really understand the inside of the game that would be quite crucial, I think.
Yeah, but that happens in any business at the end of the day. New ownership comes in and you want to implement a new strategy, a new way of running the company or the football club, whatever you want to call it. It's so rare that you see instant results, So
that's what people are seeing. That what we're seeing now. How many managers in Chelsea? In a couple of seasons, it's. I think one of the Chelsea players had been under 5 managers in 2 seasons. So it becomes very hard to understand how they think they're going to be able to get success with that number, that amount of change. And I think change is a big enemy in football. I've always been a big fan of stability. I mean, I talk back to the time when I was at Everton. David Moyes was there for maybe 10, 11, 12 years almost. So that's when we had the best success this century. Alec Ferguson at Man United. There are so many times when you can look at, and it tends to be true that Simeone at Atletico Madrid, the managers for stability and longevity do tend to produce results, and that's what should be aspired to, rather than keep changing things until you get something to sort of stick, because that may not be long term.
Yeah, at the end of the day, certainty. We go back to that keyword that we mentioned before, no? And there's plenty of examples, both. But I would argue it's not only on the pitch side, but also off the pitch. If you're able to implement a team that's there on the long term, and actually start have an executive team that's able to implement a lot of the stuff that they want to do, it's going to help the club. Look at those teams that Real Madrid has a fairly stable executive team. Manchester City, regardless of the sustainability thing that they're going through, all the best teams have very stable leadership and executive positions, right?
That's it. And you're absolutely right. It's stability in those positions as well as in the football side, and they blend together because it takes time for a chief executive to get to know a manager. It doesn't just happen overnight. You've got to form a working relationship, and with the sporting director or the head of the medical, all those things, you need to have a team that are all going in the right direction. And so that's absolutely crucial. And that's where I'm a big believer in trying to put that together. And it's what I preach to many of the new owners that we work with, that they've got to try and aspire to that if possible.
That's actually something that I spoke about with a friend of the show, Jordan Gardner. He was former owner at a club in Denmark, no? And his framework for leadership had three pillars, which is culture, stability, and leadership. That's kind of like the three pillars that he was focusing on to kind of like ensure the success of a club, no? So I think that it's relevant to what we're talking about, no? You mentioned Manchester United and everything they're going through, and how do you think, the way they're managing the club so far, or what future do you see for them? Again, what's kind of like your assessment of the situation, how they're going to benefit not only them as a brand, because Manchester United is one of the most powerful brands of football, but also the league?
I've been very critical of the way that they've approached it. I think they're trying to do too much on every single front too soon. I think you pick your battles and you pick the areas that you change. I think they've managed to destroy a lot of the staff morale with a lot of the sackings that they've done with people. I think they've destroyed a lot of the staff culture in terms of the way that they've taken away some of the benefits. They've really, I think, changed too many things all at once. I mean, we got the new stadium project that's going to be announced as well, which is fine because Old Trafford did need some attention, and the Glazers had let that go for a long time, and it was in a terrible state of disrepair. But I think Radcliffe is just, as I say, is picking too many fights and picking too much all at one time. So I'm disappointed because I think there were some key things that needed to be done. In particular, in terms of the football side, they needed that sporting director in place early, and instead they chose to have a fight with Newcastle over the remuneration of the sporting director when it was only a few £1 million that they could have sat in a room and I'm sure got it sorted out in one afternoon. But that had a big damaging effect. It meant they'd missed 2 months of this first window, and that's going to be a pretty crucial season for them. It looks like they're assembling a squad, but again, I'm seeing large Dutch factions appearing within the squad, which is never good in terms of the tribal situation that develops within a club. And also, if Mr. Ten Hag, and listen, I think he was very badly treated at the end of last season. If he is going to be relieved of his position at some stage in the future, you're probably going to see a lot more backroom staff leaving with that contingent that you would normally want to have leave. And that's always one of the key things I've always tried to put in place is that, yes, you would accept a manager and maybe 3 of his assistants going, and you would try and replace them, but the rest of the staff at the club should remain stable. I think United and Radcliffe are going to be facing that challenge down the road, and those decisions are being made now. I've also got the feeling from all the people I've been speaking to is that there are still different pockets of power within United, and so the left hand doesn't always know what the right hand's doing, and decisions are starting to become, what should we say, it's one side, there's political lobbying for different decisions to be made, and that's never a healthy situation because you must have clear and direct positions for responsibility and accountability. I understand he needed to shake things up, but I think he's perhaps picking and shaking up just all too much at once. But nevertheless, listen, I wish everybody good luck in football, but we disagree on the approaches, and that's what's healthy to discuss.
Yeah. I think it's important to clarify here. We all want the best for football.
Yes,
We all want the best for clubs like Manchester United because with all the popularity and everything they've done for the game.
absolutely. And as we said, with international games, we got competitors, and so we've got to keep football up there.
We need the best brands out there.
Yes, so I do want the best for them, but I just, my opinion is he's gone about it the wrong way. Then again, he didn't hire me, but that's okay.
That's, hey, we're here. We're just, observers.
We're here to help.
So you talked about respecting the legacy. We talked about stability. Now you were mentioning, we could summarize what you were mentioning there, that focus is the key thing that, leaders or new owners should have when entering. I don't know if there's any other advice that you would share with owners coming in from outside football into football.
I think the other thing is to understand the fan base, because since the real increase in social media development, the fan base now has got a voice more than it's ever had before. And you're seeing, podcasts, you're seeing, instant reaction now from fan groups. And it's a pressure group through the media and every type of media now that was never present before. And that means that those new owners should be getting there with an olive branch and reaching out to the fan bases and starting to become, much more available to them. Again, this is where private equity is very poor at that sort of thing. And I think that they need to see a face of a club, because people don't understand the tradition and heritage that goes behind clubs and how much it means to the fan bases. And I don't just mean Everton. I mean, in many, many clubs, but Manchester United is a perfect example. And they've got to reach out to those fan bases better than they're doing right now. It'll come back in big dividends if you do that and invest the time and learn about the heritage and traditions and understand what the thinking is. You'll be surprised if you do that as a new owner, how much the fans know and understand, and are really positive and want to do that and appreciate it when you try and do it. So I think a new owner coming in now, the other thing I'd say is, like Dan Friedkin, I was really hopeful he was going to come into Everton, because he was an owner that let his actions speak louder than his words. And that's the other thing that is very important, is that you actually do things rather than actually saying you're going to do things. And fans are not silly now. They know that. And those are two big things. So reaching out to the fan base and then not speaking until you're actually got something to say that you've done. Those are the key issues that I think would engender trust. Once you've got trust with your fan base, then you can really start to operate, and that whole feeling goes through the whole club.
Agreed. And I'm a big proponent of looking at other industries to see what football could learn. No? And especially when you speak about the fans, I always have this conversation about, or this question, why is the football industry so interested in creating or turning fans into customers, while the rest of the world are looking to actually turn their customers into fans? And another dynamic there is that you see, especially, when you go into B2B, a lot of the businesses want to understand their customers as a way to gain insights and have a strategy. And to your point, who better than your fan who's loyal to a fault, and to really understand them, speak to them, and collectively, I'm not sure if collective is the word, but at least bring their input into guiding the strategy of the club, because at the end of the day, you need their support to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, though, that we've got to bear in mind today is that the communication to fans has never been so diverse than it is right now. In the old days, it used to be through the match day program, and that was it. You get your program, and that was the paragraph from the owner or the manager, and that was the communication, and then maybe one interview in the local sports paper, and that was it. So now you've got so many platforms that you need to be able to communicate with, and that takes some time and availability, but it'll pay back dividends, as I say. And you're absolutely right. That should be the concern of a new owner, and I've seen very few of them do it.
Yeah. Now, just to a final segment that I want to cover with you, Keith, now is shifting to another part of the world. Let's speak about Saudi Arabia, because you've also been involved in their development. You've been there working with or collaborating with the Saudi Pro League for a while. I'm curious, do you see potential in them becoming, a top tier league or maybe even a club entering ranks like the Deloitte Money League based on what you've seen?
Yes, I do. And the reason that I think that I can back that up and to make me be less concerned about it being, if you like, a Chinese bubble that happened with the Chinese interest in football is that the World Cup in 2034 is, to me, one of the most important driving factors that are going to is going to allow this league to flourish. And I think it will become within the top 10 leagues in the world. And I think it's well on the way. I mean, we've had a big start, as we know, it's made a big splash. That splash may not be able to be carried on every year due to the resources involved, but still, I think it's got the basic fundamentals now that needs to be worked with and improved. But I think there's no doubt with new resources coming in with the 2034 goal, which is going to be something that they're going to do really well. That's going to be the added factor that will make sure this has got longevity.
Yeah, that's a key point. Then how do you place like I don't want to call it an incentive, but like an event that it's similar to the US, no, with the World Cup, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. It allows focus. It gives you a finishing line that you got to get to.
Exactly. There you go. Now, one of the big challenges they're facing is all these things related to attendance. No, it's not very high, especially when you look at different cities. That's become a challenge. So how do you solve that?
Well, the way that the league has got to solve it, there's very limited, and in fact, I'd say almost zero in terms of fan engagement and understanding how to talk to fans and collecting databases and all those sort of issues that now have become the bread and butter of the clubs, in the UK, and perhaps are the best at it in the world. So I think in Saudi, it's learning how you speak to your fan and engaging with the fan, and then getting it into action from the fan that they actually come to the games, and then you look at then you get into loyalty is the whole area once you've actually captured that fan. The whole thing about Saudi, the cultural difference though in Saudi is I think that there's got to be a big move to the family. There's got to be a much bigger move than I'm seeing right now in terms of family-friendly days and family-friendly spaces within stadiums, particularly in the smaller stadiums. But we both understand, as you say, there are clubs getting maybe 500, 600 people. But then I looked at them this season; they may be up to 1,000, 1,200. So in percentage terms, that's a big increase. Now, if they can carry on replicating that, that's going to be important, and I think there's room to do it. But nevertheless, it's going to be about facilities being improved, attacking perhaps not just your normal fan base, understanding that cultural difference in Saudi is going to be important, and getting the match day experience to be completely different and tailor made to entice people in rather than expect people to come in. But I think it can be done.
And actually, I'm just thinking, the Saudi Arabian Football Federation recently published their bid for the World Cup, not for the 2034 World Cup, and there was a big, let's say, push or focus, let's call it that, around building new stadiums, and some of them seem amazing. I mean, they managed to do that, and so do you think that is going to help grow the league, improve the experience? Is that realistic to see all those plans coming through?
Well, yes, it is because right now the PIF have put the money into the top four clubs, if you like, and there are those four clubs that are going to be competing at the top. But all these new stadium for the World Cup are going to allow the teams below to also become strong clubs as well. And the intention is to really try and create a really strong league. And if we do get some sporting integrity, and we do have the facilities for the clubs below the top four at the moment, and you start to create, a team, 10, 12 really strong powerhouse teams, you're going to have an amazing league and amazing games, and with brand new facilities, and still marquee names down there, and with the advance in the way that they're utilizing social media now, which is becoming really good and pretty slick down in Saudi, then yes, I think we're going to see that league take on strength. But it is the World Cup to me and those new stadia that are going to be the fundamental issue that will allow the league to develop. And so Saudi wants, when that comes in 2034, they want to have a vibrant league and a real hotbed of football and a hotbed of fans to be able to make the World Cup a huge success, which I'm sure they will.
That's a good point. They're not focusing on the now. They're focusing 10 years down the line. It took the Premier League, 30 years to become the league it is today?
Yes, in 1992. Yeah, that's when it started. So it's 30 years exactly, just over. And what Saudi's achieved in 2 years is incredible. And even 10 years, as you say, it would only be 12 years when we got the World Cup. So it is an amazing pace that's happening down there. And there is a lot of vision, and the people I've seen are very clever, very bright, and they're listening and they're understanding. But of course, we want to make it Saudi as well. It isn't just a copy of the Premier League or a copy of any of the other leagues. It's got to be something that's culturally Saudi, and that's important that we do that. And again, put the fan first and understand the Saudi culture. As I say, there isn't a culture of going to the game as there has been in the UK for many years. We've got to make sure that we entice fans to the game rather than expect them to come. And that's a difference in mindset that we've got to try and do.
That's a good point. And to your point that you made earlier, when we did World Football Summit Asia in Jeddah last year, that was kind of like the spirit that I saw. Everybody wanted to learn, to connect, to speak to people from all over the world. They're really curious about that. And that's something that I'm not sure, people are aware of. And the excitement that we've seen towards the second edition in Saudi that we're organizing in December has been, through the roof. And in addition to that, I was thinking about a conversation I had with Simon Chadwick about Saudi and all these developments in stadium. What people don't understand is that these imply it's effectively development for the country because you develop infrastructure, you create employment, tourism. So at the end of the day, that's why Saudi, the government is supporting this so much. And that's a key point, so
It is, and there's got to be benefits for health. I know the government's not looking just purely for an investment to create some football teams. It's got to spread throughout society, and there'll be educational factors. There'll be the whole thing for Saudi youth. And if you think about it, in 2034, those kids now that are 12, 10, 12, that's going to be their pinnacle in 2034. So it's the whole Saudi youth structure that will have this to get excited about for the next 10 or 12 years, and that's exciting.
yeah. Well, Keith, this has been so much fun. I just have one last question because I want to take advantage of your experience across Premier League and Saudi. You established leagues like Premier League, emerging league like the Saudi Pro League. So, if imagine you were tasked with creating a new professional football league from scratch, what would be your top three priorities?
Wow, that's a very interesting question. Now, I think when I think about that sort of issue, if obviously we'd be talking about starting it today or tomorrow, I think I would be looking at facilities based first of all, but those facilities would have to be with the best technology. So, I mean, if I look at the evolution of stadiums in the UK, getting Wi-Fi coverage has been almost impossible for most of them until recently. So I'd be starting off with stadia that are both fan-friendly but also have superb technological coverage for data, for Wi-Fi, and also to broadcast. Things like virtual reality, being able to have cameras over the players to be able to create virtual reality, to be able to bring the fans. I don't know if you've seen the very immersive bar in Los Angeles recently. It had the 85. It was superb. But that would require certain even better broadcast capability to be able to bring those sort of experiences to the fans everywhere around the world. So I'd be starting off right now looking to try and take the league into those technological boundaries and take it further than before and build the stadiums to invite people from globally into games rather than just the local people to the games. Fans will always be important to be there at the stadium, but that's the view I'd be taking on that. Secondly, I still believe in the star power. I believe that Ronaldo has done an amazing job. His YouTube channel launched the other day blew me away. 16 million, subscribers in less than 24 hours. This blew me away. And that's something that you still can't buy. And so star power is there. The third thing I'd want to do, though, is, and it comes right back to the start of our chat today, is bring in youth and try and make it a league that uncovered the next superstars of the world and made it the global youth league that helped them develop and produced a system for them to look after them and to safeguard them, but allow them to be young stars and the stars of the future. So I think if you got those three things right, you would have a league that was consumer friendly globally, and for the age group of the potential fans of tomorrow, that's what they deal in. That's what the currency they watch. That's where they get their news. It's what how they consume their media. And if we were way ahead of anything, a bit like the Sphere in Vegas, if we were able to become the Sphere of football, I'd be looking to try and create an experience, something like that. So that's the exciting vision I'd try and work with architects on, and then make, as I say, make us available to everybody globally. And that would be an exciting way to go forward.
Appreciate that answer. I really liked it. Thank you so much. Very clear. And I'm actually thinking it's not too far from what Saudi's actually trying. They're trying to build their facilities. They had their star power, because at the end of the stars, they don't only want the stars. They also want the people to tell the stories. That's what the star. And then the next pillar, they do understand, this is something that I spoke about with Romeo Josak from Falcons at Saudi Arabia, that he understood that even if you bring Cristiano Ronaldo, if the young player is not able to learn from him, train like him, they were never going to be able to develop the local talent.
Yeah, you must know what good looks like.
Exactly. Anyway, Keith, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate it. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to leave with the audience, but this has been a business and football masterclass, just like always. So thank you so much. But again, the floor is yours.
No, listen, it's great. No, there's nothing more I wanted to add, but really what I did love from the last one is people to reach me on LinkedIn or any other areas that want to chat about ideas or things that we discussed, because I love creative conversations and to keep the brotherhood of the football side and sisterhood together, and to really be able to keep on chatting within the family of football. I always want to see the next great thing happening.
Well, Keith, for those creative conversations, you always have an open invitation here. So, feel free to get in touch and we can make that happen, So
Great.
Anyway, Keith, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
And we'll speak next time.
Okay. Thanks very much. Bye.
And there you have him, Keith Wyness, returning to the show for another sport business masterclass. I hope you enjoyed that one, because I'm sure I did. Let me see if we can try to summarize the key takeaways for you very quickly. We started talking about everything related to the Premier League, and there's some interesting stuff going on there. At the end of the day, we talked about the revenue model. We talked about the sustainability rules. But two things that I want you to remember there is how important having certainty is, in terms of controlling your costs, in terms of, the relegation, how that is impacting. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, but it is kind of like a difference between the American model, if you will, and the European model. No, but again, I really like the conversation about embracing that fans are also international, meaning club is a global brand. They have to be able to connect with the international fan, to bring them along and make them part of the community. And if that means playing official games, I guess so be it. No, if it's good for business, good for the club, why not? I also liked in everything we talked about the ownership dynamics, and I really want you to just remember the key lessons that he shared there. So remember those. Respect the legacy of the game, the importance of stability, and not only on the squad, but also on your executive team. You need stability there. Focus on the things you need to focus on, and then make your actions be louder than your words. Just do the work. Get it done. And then finally, I really liked how he described when we were talking about this, emergence of Saudi as a top tier league. The three pillars, that he would focus on if he had to create a league from scratch. So basically, focus on the facilities with, a lot of technological or strong technological component to it, the star power. And not only because you want stars, but you need stars that actually help showcase and help to tell the story of what's going on there. And finally, the youth talent. At the end of the day, you need the youth to develop, to be good football talent. That's going to ensure the long-term success on one hand of, from a football perspective, but that's also going to help you connect with the younger fan. You need those stars of tomorrow to connect with the fans of tomorrow. Anyway, guys, if there's anything else that stood out to you, as always, let me know. Reach out on social media, and we'll be happily listening. And nothing else. If you find this valuable, please share it with colleagues in the industry, with anybody you think can find it valuable. Subscribe to our newsletter. Make sure you check out our upcoming events on the website. And nothing else from my side. I want to wish you a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you on the next episode of the World Football Summit podcast.